Our next guest joining us via Skype is currently one of the play-by-play voices for NHL on NBC and NHL on Versus. While hockey has been his primary focus, he's called college basketball and the WNBA games as well. His professional broadcasting career began as a radio announcer and public relations director for the Adirondack Red Wings of the AHL from '79 to 1985. A two-time New York State Broadcasting Association honoree, he was named the AHL's top public relations professional in 1984. He has called games for the Red Wings, Panthers, and the Phoenix Coyotes. He has also called NHL games for Fox in the mid-90s, as well as providing hockey play-by-play for NBC's coverage of the 2006 Winter Olympics in Italy. He served as a last-minute replacement for Mike Emmerich at the coverage of the NHL's Winter Classic between the Red Wings and Chicago Blackhawks on January 1st, 2009, when Doc Emmerich was unable to broadcast the game due to laryngitis. He has called the 2011 NHL Heritage Classic on Versus, where the Montreal Canadiens played the Calgary Flames in Calgary, Alberta. And tonight, to add to his resume, he put Sports Talk New York on it. We welcome Dave STRADER to talk hockey. Welcome, Dave.
Mark, nice to be here. Thank you.
You know what? Right now, all I can think of in the back of my head is that song. It's the most wonderful time of year, as opening day is right around the corner. And, you know, we like to get a little flavor. So let's talk a little bit about this, where, you know, Sports Talk New York. We'll talk about the Eastern Conference a little bit. So let's start right at the top. The defending Stanley Cup champions, the Bruins. Since the NHL went to the format that they're currently in, 1993 was the start of that. Only the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New Jersey Devils have repeated as Eastern Conference champs. It's obvious that Malkin and Crosby being healthy, and Crosby's a little bit of a question mark, as well as the outstanding work by George McPhee in the offseason for the Capitals, and a completely remake of the Flyers and the Rangers. A lot of obstacles in the way. Do you think the Bruins have what it takes to repeat?
I think they have what it takes, but just for all the reasons you listed and maybe some other ones, it shows why it is so difficult, especially in today's National Hockey League. You know, first and foremost, teams have to stay healthy. We hear coaches and managers and players all the time say, you know, we can't use injuries as an excuse. It's a chance for somebody else to step to some key players last year. But in the end, if they were going to make it to the next level once the playoffs started, they needed to have those guys that they lost because of injury. So, yeah, I think the Bruins have what it takes. You know, they haven't had to do as much as other teams in terms of personnel changes during the offseason. But I think the Eastern Conference is going to be just a lot of fun to cover this year. But, you know, one of the ways I like to look at it, Mark, is that you look at the teams that made the playoffs the year before. Say, who's going to come up from that group that didn't make the playoffs and jump in there? In order to do that, you got to look at somebody that made it and say, okay, who's going to come out? And I look at the 8 teams that made the playoffs in the East. I think every one of them got better. I think the biggest question mark probably is Philadelphia, just in terms of all the changes they made. It's going to translate in the locker room, chemistry, etc. But I think it's going to be pretty difficult for any of those non-playoff teams to jump up unless somebody that made it last year has injuries or something strange happens this season.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention that, because also what you also look at is, of those 8 teams, you take a look at performances. And if you go with the Bruins, you take a look at possibly one of the greatest performances, basically the so-called triple crown of goaltending, the Stanley Cup, Conn Smythe, and the Vezina. Timmy Thomas had an incredible season. Is there any reason to believe that, A, he can't repeat that season, and does he need an exact replication of an absolute amazing season for the Bruins to succeed?
He's got to be pretty good. But I also like their backup. They do have, you know, with Tuukka Rask, a guy that they can go to that I think the Bruins would be comfortable with. But, you know, every time you think Tim Thomas is not going to be able to live up to whatever he's done prior, he comes back and surprises us. I mean, after he had that injury after the great season a couple years ago, at his age, we all thought, you know, is he going to be able to do it again? And then he gives us a performance like he did last year and in the playoffs. So it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, he's still going to have to be very good. We all know how important goaltending is.
And here in New York, there's been so much made of the Rangers' failure on the power play. Sorry, it paused there for a second. Here in New York, there's so much emphasis put on the Rangers' failure of the power play, but yet you look at the Boston Bruins, and their power play ranked 20th overall in the NHL last season, but they were the 5th leading scorer on 5-on-5. They had very balanced scoring. Breakout year by Lucic last year with 30 goals. How important is the success of their power play getting better this season for them to advance?
Well, when you're as good as they are 5-on-5, their numbers, we talked about this during the playoffs, their 5-on-5 numbers were incredible. And I've asked a lot of different opinion that I value over the course of the years. I'll say, okay, you're going to a playoff series. Would you rather be really firing all, rather be firing on all cylinders 5-on-5? You want your system working well. You want to know that you can produce offense 5-on-5. You want to know you can defend 5-on-5. Because power plays, no matter how good the personnel is, they're streaky in nature. I mean, sometimes you'll get on a roll. Sometimes you'll do everything right, but you'll face an opposing goaltender that's hot and just not letting in any goals. It's harder to rely on that. Their 5-on-5 play was so good. This is where closing because 5-on-5 their numbers were just phenomenal. But in terms of the Rangers, like any other team, there's times when your power play you get to the end of a game and you'll say, yeah, we lost by a goal and 0 for 5 on the power play and maybe had a little bit of 5-on-3 and you'll think that's what let you down. So you do have to have a power play that'll come up. It's more about when you score those power play goals, I think, than the overall numbers. If you go 1 for 5, but that one time was in the third period of a tie game, coaches will talk about the timing of it more than they will the percentage. So I think everybody would like to have a power play going, but I like teams that are consistent at 5-on-5 play.
Now, I guess the reason, there's probably two reasons why I find the East so fascinating. Number one, we're on the East, so we get to see so many of their games, and just the dynamics of the certain teams. One of which, to me, and we had Coach Bruce Boudreau on last week, is the Washington Capitals. If you're a Washington Capital fan, you have to be excited by the work George McPhee did this offseason. The key for me was addressing what I felt was a glaring weakness for them, and that's a veteran presence goaltender for the playoffs, and they have that in Thomas Vokoun. They added tons of depth with quality guys like Joel Ward, Vokoun, like we mentioned, Hammerlick, Halpern, and Troy Brouwer, which is one of those guys that I feel fits so well in the Eastern Conference as well. What do you think those additions do for the Caps?
Well, on paper, I think it makes them a more complete team. It makes them a harder team to play in a 7-game series. I agree with you wholeheartedly about the veteran presence in goal. Vokoun's had a terrific career. I think he'll instill a great deal of confidence in that room. And I agree with the other names that you mentioned. I think Troy Brouwer is a terrific addition to the team as well. George McPhee has done a terrific job. There's no reason why this team, shouldn't be another 105, 110 point year, maybe even more. The question is going to be for them, like all teams that have had success in the regular season and had an expectation, and for whatever reason let down in the playoffs year after year. Now it's all going to be, okay, what are you going to do in April? And until we get to that point, and that's the challenge for coaching staffs like what Boudreau's got to do this year is keep the guys focused on this season. And it's, we hear Tortorella say it all the time. Coach Dave Tippett, who I covered out in Phoenix for a long time, they all talk about the process. They don't want to get caught up in numbers or expectations or point totals that you think you have to reach or where you're going to finish. It's all about the process. If Washington can stick to the process, I think they're going to be just fine.
And you mentioned that it's all about the playoffs. And at this point, although he's still very young, he obviously is one of the most dynamic, biggest impact player in the league in Alex Ovechkin. If these continued playoff failures, and some of them are not his fault, obviously, but how much of an impact will that, if Ovechkin does not win a Stanley Cup within his career, how much of an impact will that have on his overall legacy?
Well, it'll have an impact. I was in Detroit for all those years when Steve Yzerman was putting up 150, 160 points and scoring 70 goals. Those teams that had high expectations. They had all those playoff failures when I was there. We all remember the first round exit at the hands of the San Jose Sharks and against the Toronto Maple Leafs, both in Game 7s on home ice in the first round. And there was a lot of talk about Steve Yzerman, great player, but he's never going to be known, have a legacy unless he wins a Stanley Cup. And lo and behold, it was later in his career, and after he had to go through some transformation as a player, he ends up winning 4 Stanley Cups in the span of 11 years. Now, can that happen to Alex Ovechkin? It probably could. But I have a problem sometimes just at this stage of a player's career saying unless he wins, he's not going to be considered a great player. I think you can still be a great player without winning because there's so many factors in this ultimate team sport that determine whether or not you win a Stanley Cup championship. But, certainly it adds to the resume and to the belief that you are a champion if you're able to not only win, but be a key guy and be a leader in winning a Stanley Cup.
Now, you just touched on that it's a team sport, and I don't think any team, brought that home more so than a team that was without all its superstars, but yet managed to have an incredible season. The Penguins, to me, are the wild card. They showed resiliency last year despite injuries to almost everyone on their team. Without Sidney Crosby, without Gino, and most of the season without Jordan Staal, they played. Staal played, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood in the 40s, maybe 42 games last year. You look at those three guys. I don't know what the health is. I know Gino's back. We don't really know what's up with Sid, but those three guys coming back to the lineup, and what we saw with Chris Kunitz and Tyler Kennedy playing in their absence, how much will the experience that those guys got carrying the team in the absence of the big three help?
That's a good question. I think it'll help immensely. I think, going back to something I said earlier, players and coaches, when injuries happen, they say we can't use that as an excuse. But certainly, if you looked at the Pittsburgh Penguins on paper at the start of last season and say, okay, you're not going to have Crosby, you're not going to have Malkin, you're not going to have Staal for a great portion of the season. Now tell me where that team's going to finish. None of us would have picked them to have the kind of year they did because it's not the same personnel. However, they did overcome all that. I mean, it shows their depth. It shows that the character of the guys they have in that room besides the superstars. So now that those guys are back, it's going to be an adjustment because some of the minutes that those guys played in the absence of the superstars will be diminished. But I think they got the right guys in that room and the right leadership with Dan Bilesman and the coaching staff that they'll figure that out. And I think if you ask anybody in that room, say, hey, you played 17 minutes, but now you're only going to play 13, but you're going to have Crosby and Malkin back. I think most guys, we know how unselfish and unassuming hockey players are. I think they all say we'll welcome those guys back. But I think to get to your question, it will help that those guys had to carry a certain weight. They know they can do it. It's got to give them a little bit more swagger and confidence. But just having those guys back, I've just watched a couple of the Pittsburgh games on NHL Network, which is great having all these preseason games on. And Gino Malkin looks absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And if this is any sign of what kind of a year he's going to have until Sid gets back, and then especially after he gets back, which we all hope that he does, you're right, the Penguins are going to be a force in the East.
It's interesting. To me, Dan Bilesma gets the most out of his players. And each year you take a look at the guys that have left that team and you say, oh, wow, those are big character guys, and that's going to have an impact on their team. In the last 2 years, it hasn't. This year, two more of those quality impact guys have gone from the team, Max Talbot and Mike Rupp. It seems like they have guys already in place to take those character spots over. Is that a testament to the general manager, or is that more that Dan Bilesma is able to get the most out of his entire roster? Or both?
Well, yeah, I think it's a little bit both. I mean, I think it's a testament to the general manager to recognize the importance of guys like that. Say, you know what, we got to come up with somebody that cuts the bill. What a Talbot or Rupp gave us. Because they know the importance of guys like that. And Mike Rupp playing on that fourth line and potentially that fourth line that they need. And so they're already talking about the importance of a Mike Rupp because they know. And Mike Rupp going back to his days in New Jersey as well. So he's been in some great organizations and around some great players, and he's going to bring something to that Ranger locker room. But yeah, and that Dan Bilesman and his coaching staff will get the most out of him.
Now, another thing in the East, which is totally intriguing to me, is the Philadelphia Flyers. This is a team that's had more work on them than Joan Rivers' face. Totally different team. Garner, Jeff Carter, Mike Riches, Chris Versteeg, Villing Lane, Dan Carcillo. In their place, Brizgalov, Wade Simmons, Jacob Voracek, Brendan Chin, Jaromir Jagr, and Maxime Talbot. So the first question, I guess, is probably the glaring one to me. This is a team that had a pretty nice season last year and only 2 years removed from the Stanley Cup. Why blow up a team like that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think they look at what's happened over, you go back to 97 when they lost in the finals to Detroit with, was it Mark Hextall that was their number one goaltender? I think even then, all the number one goaltenders, it's a revolving door that's running out. And I think they got to a point where they finally said, look, we cannot have every year where we've got a contending team, and yet at the end, all anybody talks about is the goaltending. So they went out and they addressed that. But to me, the question is, given the model that we've seen, especially since the last team like Detroit, like Chicago when they won it in against Philadelphia in 2010, when you look at Carolina the first year out of the lockout, it seems as important as goaltending, it seems like in today's salary cap era, the way the game is played, that you got to have a competent goaltender. You got to have a guy that can stop the pucks at key times in games. But you invest the kind of money that the Flyers have invested in that position at the expense of what it does to the rest of your roster, and still enable yourself to contend for a Stanley Cup. That to me is a big question. They put an awful lot of money into a guy who I cut out in Phoenix. He's a talented goaltender. Most nights, and you'll hear the Phoenix Coyotes players and coaches say this, most nights Brizgalov was their best player. However, and not to put it all on him, because for bad luck of the draw, the Coyotes get the Detroit Red Wings 2 years in a row, and both years Detroit was a motivated team. 2 years ago, when it went to 7 games, they had all those injuries, got guys back late, had a little bit of a late run, and Briz was great up until Game 7 and led in 6 goals or whatever it was, and Briz was just not himself at all. Not the sole reason they lost in 4 straight, but just a dreadful playoff performance. So is he the guy that come crunch time is going to put that team on his back if he has to and leave him? Number one, that's the big question. Like you just went through the list of guys, and when you blow up a locker room like that, you're taking an awful lot of risk. Now, you've got Chris Pronger, and clearly a lot of people wondered, whose room it was when Richards was there, the cast of characters you mentioned, and you got Chris Pronger in the room. Well, it's his room now, and you couldn't have a better guy, I don't think, to pull a group of players together under any circumstances, and also lead on the ice as well as in the locker room. So, but to me, like I said at the beginning of the interview, when you look at the 8 teams that made the playoffs, to me they're the wild card, and I don't say that I think they're going to go from a 100-point team to struggling to make the playoffs, but until they do it, until they prove it, there's still going to be a lot of question marks. That's a bold move that Paul Holmgren made to blow up that team. And I'd be interested. I haven't seen a lot of interviews with him and read much. I wonder if this was a plan at the end of last season. Okay, I'm going to blow this up, or if it just sort of happened move by move by move. The next thing you know, he's got a remade team. I mean, on paper, they're still a very good team. Brizgalov will give them tremendously consistent goaltending, but will they be able to contend with all those other great teams in the East? I think that's going to be one of the fascinating stories to watch.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because the big question mark for me on that team is with the absence of Richards, Carter, and Versteeg, you're taking away 80 goals, 98 assists, 178 points. I look at some of these guys, I'm wondering where that production is going to come from. One of my dogs is named Yager, so I love Yaromir, but I'm wondering how much he's got left in the tank and what he's going to be able to contribute. Where do you think this scoring is going to come from? That they might be better defensively, but that's an awful lot of offense to take away from that roster.
It is, and as much as we all hear about defense wins championships, goaltending wins championships, at the end of the day, you still have to outscore the other team, and you got to have balanced scoring. We see so often now with defensive systems and the way coaching staffs and video coaches, and there's no secrets in today's game. And I think we see it particularly in penalty killing. That penalty killing schemes are able to shut down terrific power plays. It's difficult to generate offense the way the game is played today, unless you've got balance. And Yaromir is a motivated guy. He's going to want to show that he can still play in the league. So I think that's a small risk and potentially big reward for Paul Holmgren. But you're right. You go through though, and you had the numbers. That's a lot of production. To try to duplicate. So I don't think they expect necessarily point for point to replace that. I think they're looking to be a much better defensive team and feel they can win a lot of 2-1, 3-2 hockey games. But again, it just it creates a whole different dynamic when you look at that roster this year compared to last.
Now we'll wrap with the three local teams, starting with the two that didn't make the playoffs, because that was, that is what a lot of people do. You take a look at last season's guys that made the playoffs, see who's looking out on the outside in, and see if they've made enough improvements. People that watch the show know I'm a big Ranger fan, so they kind of think I'm a little biased, and I don't give the Islanders their due. For me, the Islanders, their big upside is their youth, but their big downside is their youth. Young players are very unpredictable. They have a tremendous core of young players led by John Tavares, who really began to pile on the points during the second half of last year, his second season. Obviously, he needs to improve on the 67-point campaign, but the guys that surround him, guys like P.A. Parenteau, Matt Molson, Grabner, Blake Como, do they have enough offense with that young group of guys to compete night in and night out?
Well, that's the big question. I like what Garth Snow has done in terms of locking up his core. They put a lot of money out there. It's been an interesting summer for the Islanders. They had that referendum that was voted down, and the big disappointment of the Lighthouse Project and the renovation of the Coliseum. And you wonder mentally how that kind of filters through the whole organization. But yet you see them on the hockey operations side go and lock everybody up, and I think that creates a lot of goodwill and good feeling, not only in the locker room but in the Islander community with the fans. I think it's well put. Their youth is their upside for this season, but it also can be the downside because you're asking a lot of young guys to do a lot of big things. But I think the Islanders will be a lot better. I heard Billy Jaffe on MSG Hockey Night Live the other night say that he thinks they'll contend for a playoff spot. And again, you look at those teams. Like the Devils, like the Islanders, like the Carolinas, the teams that didn't make it. Who's going to step up? The question is who are they going to knock out of there? It'll be very tough to displace some of these teams. So I think the Islanders will be a better team. They'll be a more interesting team, but enough night in and night out to make the playoffs, I think, is going to be a tough task for them.
I think also what cloudies the Islanders situation for me is, aside from Strite, they have a tough defense, but I don't think they have enough offense from the back line to help them. But where I kind of lose it is their goaltending. I don't think there's a clear vision, and part of it is because of Ricky DiPietro's injuries and the long contract. But where do you see them going? I mean, the fact that Nabokov has not gotten into one preseason game yet Garth Snow says that he met with him and there is going to be the competition. Where do you think they're going with this goaltending situation?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on Nabokov. If they could get him, in that rotation or maybe as the number one guy, I think that changes a lot of things with his experience, the great teams he's played for, the situations he's played in. I think, with the uncertainty, as you mentioned, because of DiPietro's injuries, to have a guy like Nabokov that could potentially be there. Montoya came in and did a nice job when he came in, but is he a long-term solution or whatever? I kind of doubt that, but he has played well. I think just creating some competition in that position is the right thing to do. But that is a big question mark for the New York Islanders. Who is going to be their number one guy? Who's the guy that are they going to have a guy that they're going to be able to say we can play him 55, 60 games and he's our number one guy?
It's funny that you mentioned Montoya because I guess you and I both have the expertise on him. I saw him here in New York. You saw him there in Phoenix. And at the end of the day, yes, sometimes goaltenders have peaks and valleys, but Montoya has not proven it to various organizations. So I agree. I don't think he's a number one, and I agree with you totally on their goaltending. Another thing you mentioned is you take a look at the teams that didn't make it and what they did on the offseason. And for me, it's shocking that the Devils basically did nothing of note during this offseason. Yes, they'll have a healthy Zach Parise, but make no mistake, from my opinion about this team kind of becomes the old Atlanta Thrashers. Its success and failures purely on Ilya Kovalchuk. And I'm kind of surprised that the Devils' model for all those years was such a team concept, and that the team concept made stars of guys like Gianta, like Gomez, like Bobby Holik. The system made the players. Now they've gone away from that model and don't, to me, resemble the New Jersey Devils whatsoever. What's your feeling on the Devils?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to depend on Pete DeBoer. I think one of the reasons that he was brought in is that they probably feel that here's a guy that's a bright young coach. Things didn't work out in Florida, but he's not the only guy that things haven't worked out in Florida. That you look at Jacques Martin, who was an experienced coach, and DeBoer didn't have experience in the NHL. It was his first job, but I think that Lou is hoping that DeBoer can come in. He talks about playing a defensive system, but it's really more of an up tempo game, more of a puck possession game, and generate some offense. And I've seen a couple of interviews with some of the Devils guys, and they seem optimistic that they're going to be able to do that. But you're right. It seems that compared to those teams of the mid-late 90s and early 2000s, when you knew exactly what the New Jersey Devils were, you knew exactly what it was when you were going to play them, and you could complain all you wanted about Jacques Lemaire and the trap and dragging the game down, all that kind of stuff. But what they did better than anybody else, and that's why they were champions when they were. So it's going to take a little bit to get back to that. Some of it has to do with personnel as well. So it's to me, I look at it too, and I look at the rest of the teams in the East, and it's going to be a challenge for Pete DeBoer and the Devils to make the playoffs.
And you mentioned their glory days, and their glory days, obviously, a huge part of that was Marty Brodeur. You take a look at their goaltending situation now, and the two guys are almost close to qualifying for ARP. You got Marty at 39, and the backup, Johan Hedberg, is 38. Is that the way to go in the current game in the NHL? I know Marty's a great goaltender, but maybe you want to go a little bit more on the side of youth for your backup?
Well, I guess it's probably easy to say that, but a lot of times these are just case-by-case situations, and Marty Brodeur is such a unique athlete, and again, I think he's going to be a motivated guy. I think he's ready to show that he can get back to the form that's put him in the argument of the greatest goaltender of all time. He certainly has the numbers, and Hedberg's been a serviceable guy in the National Hockey League, and I think you have to have the right mentality if you're going to back up a great goaltender like Marty Brodeur. Maybe a young guy wouldn't fit that mold the way Hedberg can. So, that's something you have to decide within the organization. But you have to hope when you look at two guys like that at that age, you better hope you're developing something in your minor league system or through the draft that you're not going to fall on your face when one or both of these guys step aside.
And finally, my team, the New York Rangers. Post-lockout, and I'm definitely in the minority here, because if you look at Twitter, you look at Facebook, you look at the blogs, people have crucified Glenn Sather. Now, I'll take him to task on his free agent signings. A lot of them not worked out, Gomez, Drury, Redden. But if you take a look at the amount of quality young prospects he has acquired or drafted, I don't, I'd be hard-pressed to find, someone who's done that type of work, with whether it be the Kreiders, the Borks, the Stepans. There's just guys that keep coming, and a testament was last year, the guys they called up. How do you see Glenn Sather's overall tenure here at New York?
Well, I think you hit on two of the important things. I think, especially from the outside looking in, the thing that jumps out are these free agent signings and some of these contracts where, at the time, even before the player steps on the ice, you scratch your head and go, how can they give that guy that kind of money? Granted, you have the money, but still, how do you do that? But on the other side, when you peel away some of those bad signings and you look at what they've been able to do through the draft, and I think you bring in a guy like John Tortorella, and I remember one of his recent rants, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or last year, Tortorella said something like, do you want to be a team that battles and maybe gets into 8th place every year and then gets eliminated in the first round, or do you really want to challenge for being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender? In order to do that, if I remember the gist of what he said, is again, it's the process. You have to get these young guys in. You got to develop an identity, and I think that's really starting to show. And now, when you add a guy like Richards, okay, now you bring in a high-priced guy who's still in the prime of his career. You can argue whether he's worth the kind of money that they spend, but boy, he gives them an element that every team needs, and especially they needed. A guy to play with Gabrick, a guy that's a leader in the room, a guy that has a relationship with Tortorella, a guy that's won a cup with Tortorella, and with the goaltending they have night in and night out, the Rangers are going to be an awful lot of fun to watch this year.
It's interesting you touched on Tortorella and the process, because At first, I was not a big John Tortorella fan. I thought that Tom Rennie was a very classy and a very good coach. But I have to say this, as I see this team evolving more into a John Tortorella type of team, meaning the players that Sather has gathered, I see him getting the most out of guys like a Brian Boyle, who worked his ass off last season to get in shape, went to a skating coach. I see that now happening with Voltek Walski. He worked out this offseason with Roberts, who we all know did an unbelievable job with Steven Stamkos, and he went to Brian Boyle's skating coach. This is a guy, and you saw him as well in Phoenix. This is a guy who's got all the tools in the toolbox, but yet somehow doesn't seem to be using them. Is this the season where we finally see him break out, if in fact, the plans for him to play on this top line go forward?
Well, he's the kind of guy, and I did see him in Phoenix, and boy, he made a splash when he came in. When he was acquired at the trade deadline there a couple of years ago and came in, and I forget the exact numbers, but he was about a point-a-game guy over the last 20 games, was terrific in the playoff series against Detroit that went to Game 7. He gets the contract, and then, I mean, he just completely went away. And this was something that, was kind of a knock on him with Colorado. How many chances does a guy like this get? At some point, he's going to have to step up and be accountable and show that he can be an everyday player. That's all coaches want. Whatever kind of player you're going to be an everyday player. How much more of an opportunity can you ask than to play with Brad Richards and Marian Gaborik? I mean, come on. And with his, like you say, he's got all the tools. With his skill, this could be a career maker for him. This could be a place that he could play as long as those other guys are there. So he better be committed. I want to believe, having seen him at his best, that he can do it. But what we've all seen when he's at his best is the physical skill. Whether he has it in here, in his heart and in his mind to do what you have to do to play every night. You're going to have to play through games. You're going to face every team's top defensive pair. You're going to face the best that every team's got to try to shut you down. So mentally, you've got to be strong. And this is where Brad Richards, with all the great games that he's had in all these different circumstances, he's as strong mentally as any player in the game. And we all know what Gaborik can do with his skills. So this is Wojtek Wolski's chance to shine. And if he can, with his skills on that line, and then you can slide everybody else in behind him, and all of a sudden John Tortorella's got 4 pretty good lines that he can roll out there. I think, even you being a Ranger fan, you can smile and think this is going to be a fun season. I'd like to see him do it. I think the kid, like I said, he's had some success in this league, and he just needs to show it on an everyday basis.
Aside from the teams we touched on, are there teams that you really want to pay attention to in the East as well as the West? What are the storylines you find fascinating this coming season?
Well, I think the one team for me that didn't make the playoffs last year that I'm going to be very interested in watching is the Florida Panthers. We talked about the Flyers blowing things up, and they were very good, and within a couple of games of winning a Stanley Cup 2 years ago. Florida Panthers have not made they're one of 2 teams with Toronto that have missed the playoffs every year since the lockout, and their streak, unfortunately for them, goes beyond that prior to the lockout. I was in Sunrise for a couple of years after the lockout, and having been in markets like Florida and Phoenix, and you see the challenges that you have to compete for the entertainment dollar. Not to say that there isn't competition in New York or other places, because there certainly is, but when you're in a non-traditional market that has an NBA team, a Major League Baseball team, an NFL team, terrific college programs, and you're battling to get those fans to come out and watch an NHL game, you better have something special for them. And the Panthers haven't. So what does Dale Talon do? He completely blows it up. And you can argue case by case on how much he spent for certain guys, given Jovanovski 4 years, and how much he paid for all these players he brought in. But he brought in, to me, a very interesting mix of players. And the question for them is going to be goaltending, because they don't have Bokun now, and will they be able to do it with the tandem that they have? But that's going to be a team that I'm going to be very interested in watching, and I still have a lot of friends there, and I would love to see them do well. I'd love to see them be in contention for a playoff spot all year long, and maybe somehow sneak in, because it's been so long for the fans down there at Sunrise. But they're going to be an interesting team to watch with all the changes that Dale Talon made.
And you mentioned Toronto. I mean, Do they finally get over that hump? I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, that's the hockey head hotbed of the world, and for them each year to go through this, it's painful from the outside. I can only imagine what it must be like being a Leaf fan.
Yeah, I when you think of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the problems they've had getting into the playoffs, you think, can you imagine the New York Yankees going through as many years without making the playoffs or struggling like that? A team that has got all the money in the world, and like you say, they're the hotbed of hockey. Again, they're another team that they've made some improvements. They've got some good young talent, but who are they going to knock out of that playoff spot? That's the tough thing. So, always interesting when you got Brian Burke as a quote to see what's going to happen next with the Toronto Maple Leafs. But yeah, they'll be knocking on the door again, but. Whether they can knock one of those teams out that made it last year, we'll have to wait and see.
And I guess the other big question for me, and not so much a big question because I'm sure the novelty at least coming back, they'll be very successful. But hockey in Winnipeg, are you excited about it?
I'm happy for them. I was in the middle of all the Winnipeg talk out in Phoenix, and I can't tell you how difficult it was going back to the spring and summer of '09 when the team in Phoenix was taken into bankruptcy, and all we heard was the team's going to move, and then, I saw an interesting story in the Globe and Mail the other day that apparently in May of 2010, which would have been sometime during the playoffs season before last, the Coyotes were within 10 minutes of being the team that was going to go to Winnipeg, and it turned out that was put on hold when the city of Glendale came up with $25 million to offset the potential losses and operating expenses for the upcoming season. So it turned out to be the Atlanta Thrashers. But, I'm excited for Winnipeg. I was the voice of the Red Wings during that playoff series in '96 when they had to say goodbye at the Winnipeg Arena after that Game 6 loss to the Red Wings. And, unfortunately, there were a lot of things, kind of a perfect storm that came together at the time. The aging arena, kind of an eroding fan base. The economy was tough there. And so, a lot of things have changed. I've not obviously seen that new building, the MTS Center, but people are excited about this, and to sell out every season ticket in less than 5 minutes or whatever the number was, speaks to the passion of those fans. So I'm very happy for them that they finally got a team.
I was kind of disappointed that they didn't go back to the old jersey stuff. That's the one thing. I wish they would have kept those. Dave,
here's the thing I'll say about that real quickly is that they weren't going to go back to the old jerseys. To me, I don't think they should have gone with Jets. Because, every record of the Jets now still stays with the Coyotes because that's where that franchise went. I think it just creates a lot of confusion. I understand why they did it on the one hand because, people there, when they get their team back, it's the Jets. But it's a different franchise. I know there was a lot of talk about moving on and going with another name, whether it was the Moose, which was their American League team, or whatever it was. But, none of the records as these Jets will have anything to do with the old Jets, and I think it just creates a lot of confusion.
I agree. Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure, and like I said, it's the most wonderful time of year. Hockey, is right around the corner, and we'll be hearing a lot of you, so look forward to it, and hopefully we touch base with you during the season.
All right, be glad to do it. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dave.